Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President of Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. And my special guest today is Alfonso Asensio, who is the Managing Director of Jellyfish here in Japan. Alfonso, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Tell us about Jellyfish. That's a very unusual name for a company. We'll get into your background of why you're here, but just for the viewers, they're mostly thinking Jellyfish. What's that all about? What is the business?
Yeah, I tell you, it's a hard name to Google when you are looking for our agency. Jellyfish, we are a UK-based digital agency and company. So we are actually in Japan only one or the two global resellers for Google. And basically what we do, we were founded about 14 years ago. What we do is we just help companies to go through the digitalization process and their digital maturity. So everything to do with digital marketing, data, consumer data. How do you connect the dots to understand all the digital sphere? We can just help with that, all the way from helping you sorting out your data to helping you to run your advertising with Google, Meta, TikTok, Amazon, whoever you might be working with.
Oh, okay. It's an unusual name, isn't it? As you say, it's one of those things when you do searches on it, it must be a nightmare because trying to differentiate your company from the name Jellyfish, like even for me, the name Story is a bit of a problem because I'm always searched as Dr. Greg Story.
Right.
But often the Google searches will come up with Greg's Story about some person called Greg and their story.
Right.
It gets confused about the name. So in my feed, it should be about me. I've got all these, people turning up. And then because I've got the word doctor in there, that also confuses it. So I can imagine, when you said that, I thought, yeah, I get that too for searches. Not too bad, but I get it a little bit. So how long have you been in Japan now?
So actually I did 2 tours of duty. So
two tours of duty. Well, nicely done.
I did try to get away for a while, and I didn't work. I realized that I missed Japan. So it coming to 20 years now.
20 years.
10 years, and then a first round, and then this time around another 10 years.
So altogether 30 years.
10 and 10.
10 and 10. Okay, right. So, well, let's go back to the start. How is it that you came to Japan in the first place? Where's the Japan connection here?
Yeah, so the first time I landed in Japan, I came over to do my postgraduate here, my master's degree, and people were asking me.
Okay, stop right there. Why Japan? You can do a master's degree in Australia,
right.
America, Europe, Italy, anywhere around the world. Why a master's degree in Japan?
When people ask me that, my standard answer is I probably watched too many Kung Fu movies back in the day. And it's just,
you should have gone to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
That's where all the Kung Fu movies came from,
Yeah,
right?
I guess so, yeah.
Not
But I did have, back on the days before the internet, when it was hard to get an accurate image of a place that was as far away from Spain as Japan was, it did have some sort of fascination. I wasn't very clear how things will be here, but I was very interested and very curious about it. Luckily, I came knowing very little about Japan. And luckily, what I found matched my interests, and I realized I fit quite well with the environment. Somebody say, Spain, people tend to be fairly relaxed and informal. I think I'm probably more of a formal person in a formal environment.
Okay.
So it was a good match. And, I never regret it. And in fact, it's hard to imagine how life might have been if I didn't take that step.
Well, Japan is a much more formal country. I mean, coming from Australia myself, which is a very informal culture, extremely informal. So the contrast with the formality, Japan is pretty major. And I'm guessing Spain may be a little bit similar. And, again, what was the subject of your master's degree? Where did you go and how did you do it?
Yeah, so I studied journalism back in Spain.
Okay.
So my original plan was to, be a journalist, write. And I was not a very good journalist, I believe. I never expected to become engaged in business, but I think that was probably more of an alignment with my interests and whatever talent I might have. But yeah, well, I was a major, journalistic major, and I came to Japan. But even though, so this was 2098, 2001, I was in Nagoya University.
Nagoya University.
Yes, which was
98 to 2001. I was in Nagoya until December 96. So we just
Okay.
missed each other.
Yeah, very,
I was there
very.
for 4 years in Nagoya.
Okay.
92 to 96, yeah. And then I went to Osaka. So
Okay.
we just missed each other.
Which was interesting. Actually, looking back, I obviously I wanted to come to Tokyo, but it was very hard to get into a program here. And in retrospective, I'm kind of glad I went to Nagoya because it allowed me to look Japan that is not so Tokyo-centric and
Yeah.
kind of see what it was happening on the other areas of the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was there. I did. I studied. Those were the years of the .com. So the first wave of internet. Everybody was like crazy trying to get online, but there was not a business model to support it. And so it was very bizarre because it was a bit of a gold rush without the gold. There was no
Gold rush
revenue
without the
model.
gold, yeah.
So yeah, my major was digital media and new media online. And I guess from there is where eventually my career kind of put me in the track of having an interest of what was happening with the new technologies, what was happening with the new media, how those things could be profitable. And it took a while for things to get rolling, but eventually people figured it out. Like
So what we had, when was YouTube 96? YouTube was launched in 96, was it? I'm just trying to think back now. My dates aren't probably good on that.
yeah,
but,
it might have been later, but yeah.
Facebook, YouTube, all those sort of social media things starting around that late period.
The social media per se probably started closer to 2010, something
really?
like that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was later on. But
Okay, much later.
the model for the media were, okay, we put an ad and that's what generates the revenue. Around the 2000s is where people figured it out and cracked it and say, well, even if people don't pay a subscription to read the news or whatever it is, or to watch online content, they will be willing to look at a couple of ads just to subsidize.
Right.
And a whole ecosystem was created around that.
So you graduate with a master's degree from Nagoya University, and then what?
And then I tried to work as a journalist, and it just didn't work very well.
Here in Japan?
Here in Japan, yeah.
Oh, you're asking a lot there. That's a tough one. But
Yeah.
there are English language newspapers and journals here. They do exist.
Yeah, that was the plan. And also there's a couple of, Spanish venues that I kind of look at. But as I said before, I just don't think it was on my DNA to become a journalist. I do like writing. I still enjoy it. I know you do as well.
Yeah, I've written a few things here myself.
So I kind of found an outlet over there. But in terms of the day-to-day, it was just not exciting enough, I guess. Journalism has become a bit of a big machine where you're like a little cog where you kind of transmit information. And it's a beautiful profession, depending what you're looking for. But it wasn't for me and not for my skill set. So my first job, it was as a headhunter.
Oh,
which
in
is
Tokyo?
In Tokyo, yeah.
Right, so you got up to Tokyo as a headhunter.
I moved over to Tokyo, started work as a headhunter. I knew very little about business. And it was an excellent, I did it for 2 years. And to this day...
Well, you did well, because most people don't last very long in that business. They come in, they burn them up and churn them up and spit them out. Right?
It's a very tough gig.
Tough game, right?
Yeah, I was lucky that I was in an environment that it was, it was a boutique operation. It was not so Darwinian to a degree.
Okay.
It was a bit more encouraging. And they were looking more at the long game.
Oh, okay.
But I tell you, a lot of the things that I still use in the day-to-day pipeline, budget, P&L, all those things I learned my 2 years because as you know, as a headhunter, the business is what you make out of it.
Yeah.
You have to work it every day, day in, day out, and there's never such a thing as a project is finished. There is always a new project coming through, and you have to be very mindful of the revenue that is coming through. So, I mean, I don't think it's something I would love to do as my whole career, but as for a couple of years, it was great. It really, really taught me a lot. And I don't think I would have got my following job if I had not had those 2 years as a recruiter.
And what was the following job?
So then I got into what I call my Japan Inc. Career space.
Okay.
So I did 10 years in Japanese corporations. First one was Sega, the video game company.
Sega, okay, huge company.
So very big, yeah. We were down in near Haneda Airport. And it was really interesting because obviously it was headquarters. I was there for 5 years.
And doing what?
So I got there and I got an interview through somebody I knew, and I didn't really know what the job was. I ended up in the marketing department.
Oh, okay.
And they just needed, it was interesting because, as you know, like Japanese corporations, if you want to work as a foreign professional in Japan, you have the gaishike, the foreign companies, you have the domestic companies, and their needs are very specific, right? For big Japanese corporations, this was a while back, 20 years ago, they just needed somebody to help bridge the gap. They needed somebody in Japan who could help with the global markets, and they just needed somebody to help kind of convey their message.
Right.
So that was the marketing role.
You were the man.
Well, I was one of the,
One of the men and women.
small player, yeah.
And you were there for how long?
I was there for 5 years.
Did you, were you always an operative there, or were you leading a team there in that 5 years' time? Because I'm interested in your leadership experience in Japan. Did you get some leadership start there, or I presume not in the recruiting company, because they want you to bring in the dough.
Yeah, it's a one-man show.
Every month, thank you.
Yeah.
But in Sega, did you get a chance to lead a team there?
Yeah. So I became the marketing manager for the overseas, one of the divisions, and it was a fascinating experience because obviously it's a microcosmos of Japanese society, right?
Yeah.
And the dynamics of interacting with Japanese colleagues and working in a structure that is very Japanese, hierarchy, power dynamics, all of that, I was right in the middle of it, right? And they were great learnings as well. I was also very aware early on, I was young, but very early on I was aware that there was a glass ceiling in terms of career development, right? But yeah, I did manage to lead a team of about 7 people, and it was really interesting because
They're mainly all Japanese? Or?
they were all Japanese, yeah.
Okay.
It was
So
all
here you are. You got a master's degree in journalism. You're in the completely different industry.
Very different.
The whole Japanese team. Recruiters are probably full of foreigners, I guess, for a lot of the foreigners in that sort of business. Now you're the boss of the marketing, this particular marketing division. So when you started leading this Japanese team, what were some things that you found, oh, this works well, or this doesn't work so well?
It was really interesting because, as you know, in Japan, leadership, it has to be skillful, right? You kind of have to gain trust, especially as a foreigner, right? You have to be as good as a Japanese professional, and then some, and then you have to bring an additional value of, in my case, it's like, well, can I help develop the message that we send overseas? So a couple of things that I learned while I was there, it was, so I was doing the job for a while before I officially got
promoted, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember I had to take an exam to be able to get the
exam.
Because and it was in Japanese. And to this
How'd
day,
that go?
I don't know how well I did because I was just checking boxes like crazy. But yeah, I was doing the day-to-day. So the couple of things that I learned, one is that consensus, social consensus. It doesn't matter if you are the boss. You basically have to be very mindful that there has to be a certain consensus, that some of the decisions you make had to be justified enough for people to buy into the mission. Otherwise, a top-down, very secretive decision-making. I realized even in a small environment like this team, it just didn't work, right? It has to be, at the end of the day, it was my responsibility, and I have to set up the dynamic and the direction, but it did require certain nemawashi, right? So you needed to...
Nemawashi being the groundwork to get to a decision, get the team,
Correct.
Before the decision is made, to coalesce, to agree to the general
Exactly.
direction, and then the meeting is the formalization of what's already been pre-decided, basically, right?
Exactly.
Classic Japanese decision
Very
making formula.
Japanese, yeah. Even if it's like a very granular and molecular team. The other piece that I learned, and I was very interested in, for example, this example of the exam I have to take, processes are important, right? I think in the West and in Western companies, we are very concerned about the result, and we try to be as effective as we can. But I do think Japan corporations, they have it right in the sense that there has to be a certain process, and there has to be a set of steps that if you go through, then they will lead you to the right outcome. Now that comes with a caveat. And that's the third point that I think I learned, is that you have to generate the urgency. There was a certain pace, and I remember in this team, like we were getting so caught up with the process that at points nobody stopped asking, well, what is the return we are getting from this, you know? So generating that urgency. This was a marketing team, so revenue was not so relevant. Then as I moved into sales positions, that became more and more important, right? And kind of creating that urgency. What are the business goals? How do we get there? So we didn't get caught up on the process for the sake of the process. I think that's probably the third interesting learning that I got from that job.
And so 5 years there, was it?
5 years, yes.
Then what happens?
And then I moved into pretty much the same type of company, Bandai.
Bandai, okay. You've gone across the road to Bandai, right?
But it was, and I did have a very interesting experience in Bandai. So Sega originally was created as a service game. And I believe one of the founders was an American, right? It's a very Japanese company. And it has become, you know, very, and it's a flagship of Japanese gaming. But when I was in Bandai, and I mentioned at some casual gathering of the people, it's like, oh yeah, Sega is very similar to Bandai. And then somebody said, no. Bandai is a Japanese company. Sega is a foreign company.
Oh, really? They thought it was a real foreign company.
And that blew my mind because I've been inside both of them, and I can tell you, very, very similar. Same processes, you know, you have the ringisho, but it was interesting that they were making that kind of split-haired distinction between both of them. So I was working in marketing as well at Bandai.
Were you also running the marketing team, a division there?
Yeah, I was.
Came in as the leader?
I came, actually an interesting experience in there because I came in and I was supposed to take over this team, but because it was a new industry or a new area that I haven't known, they had me join for the first 6 months as team member.
Oh, okay. As a
just
team
to
member.
get, and then eventually I kind of moved into
up.
the role, rather than kind of bring me on top, which probably it was good in the sense that I probably needed the training wheels to get it, but it created a very peculiar dynamic, right? Because then suddenly
they all knew you were going to be the boss?
No, nobody knew.
Nobody knew. Yeah. Oh, okay.
So I had to, after 6 months, the people that I've been working with as a colleague, suddenly I was, now I'm in charge of the team. So it did change a little bit the dynamic, how, like the interpersonal relations and things like that. So I'm not sure, it had positive things.
How did you handle it? Because when you're promoted from within your peer group, and now you're the boss and they're the subordinate, that's people like thinking, well, why him? Why not me? Does he really need to be the boss, or does he deserve to be the boss? Should he be the boss? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of opinions floating around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you, as the leader, convince people to follow you and justify the fact that they chose you?
I think one of the things that I found at work was leading by example, still getting hands-on. So not because you get the new position, then you start handing out work and saying, well, do this for me, do this for me. Even as a manager, as a director, if you still are concerned about the workload, obviously your position changes because you have to be more strategic. But I think it's important for people to perceive that you can still build a deck that you need to present in the next meeting, or set up the meetings and get the people aligned and you drive that meeting rather than kind of delegating that. So having that hands-on leading by example, I think that was quite important. I think the other piece for me was just be respectful with people, right? So not still treat them in the same respectful manner that you might have done when you were a peer, right? So
I guess from their perspective too, you're a known quantity. Now, for example, if you'd come in from Sega as the boss, they didn't know you, that'd be a different equation for them, isn't it? But this way, they've worked with you.
Yeah.
They can predict you, they can anticipate you, and so they know who you are. And for them to adjust to you as the boss is probably in one way a bit easier, because a new boss is like very much an unknown. Can I trust them? How's this going to go? Where are they as a human being? A lot of unknowns there, but at least you were a known thing for them.
Yeah, and I think also because nobody knows everything, right? So I was very honest. It was a slightly different field that I've been working on. And obviously, some decision-making and processes are the same wherever you are, right? But they were specific about the industry that I was not familiar with. And I was very candid and said, look, I don't know what I don't know. Sato-san, you are the specialist. I want to hear your advice about this thing. And then I will hear a few other things, and then we'll make a decision, or I will make a decision, right? But I was kind of very transparent on not pretending to be knowledgeable of everything, right? And I think, again, maybe in a more controlling or Western mindset that might showcase some sort of weakness, but I think it also showcases that you are confident enough that you can be open about not understanding everything. And just
I think things have changed. I mean, when you think back to the boss's role used to be, well, I've done every job in this section. I know how to do everything. Therefore, I have authority based on my experience. Whereas today, you can't have that degree of knowledge because it's too specialized or too technical, or you just haven't had that exposure. And so you need to rely on people more. And I guess your authority doesn't come from you being the expert and with the supreme knowledge of everything. Other things become important, and you have to, like you did, you recognize that Sato-san is the expert here, not you, and therefore give me advice, Sato-san. But that's not diminishing your role as a leader or your authority as a leader, but it's, I guess, exemplifying the fact that business is much more complex than it used to be, right?
Yeah, and also there's probably a shift on the understanding of what a leader is from maybe the days of the Ford company, where you have this authoritarian figure that was kind of directing the lives of 10,000 employees, to what we might see now in corporations like Google or Microsoft, where there is a bit more of a collaborative leadership style, where somebody tries to how do I find the synergy to make these things? And probably because what you say is correct, right? Like, the knowledge has become so, especially in my industry, in digital, is so fast moving, and it has become so deep, it becomes siloed to a degree, right? So sometimes you are so deep in your particular technology field that you don't have overall view. And having somebody coming over and being able to connect the dots and say, look, combine this piece with this piece and you will get something. I think that sort of collaborative leadership has become more relevant in the last 20 years or so, just because industries have changed. It's not a manufacturing industry anymore. Now it's information industries, it's communication industries, learning industries or training companies, things like that, where you need to have a bit more it's like a collaborative mess of leaders that can put everybody in the same panel to make the business move forward.
So 5 years at Bandai?
I was in Bandai for another 5 years.
So what happens after that?
Then I had a really, now and then in your career, you have things that you wonder, like, if I had not been there, I wonder where I will be. So what I have been doing was, marketing development, so working on the products, trying to create the product to put them, and also marketing communication, so media, TV, print. And I was kind of dip my toes in digital marketing. And I was fascinated because an agency will come to see us, and I was the advertiser in those, right? And
you were the client.
I was the client, right? And they will come over and say, oh, we got a 0.5 click-through rate. And I was like, well, what is that? It sounds terrible. I said, no, that's really good.
Yeah.
So they were bringing all these metrics. It was such an opaque, such an obscure area of knowledge that nobody knew anything about it, right? And I was really fascinated. I was like, how is this?
How could 0.5 possibly be an acceptable number?
Right. And what is the environment where this is coming from, right? What is so complex? Somebody that I knew through my personal life, they were launching a new operation here in Japan with a Silicon Valley company it was called Acxion in the day. It's called LiveRamp now. And
What's it called then?
Now it's called LiveRamp.
LiveRamp. LiveRamp.
Yeah. So it's actually one of the leading technology communication companies in the world. They are very specialized, but basically what they do is they connect, or what we were doing back in the day, we just connect set of data, right? So kind of create this magic table where people who might be browsing in Microsoft Chrome you can connect them with the people who are searching YouTube or people who are in Facebook, right? So that connection, because data has to be apple to apples, right? So finding those keys that connect the different identifiers, it's a lot of work. And this is one of the companies that does most of it. So we were launching the operation here in Japan. I knew very little about technology, but they needed somebody who knew Japan or somebody who was familiar with, because he had two sides, right? He had the technology side, but also has the marketing side, because your clients are the CMOs and the marketing director, the people who handle the media money. So they told me, do you want to come and do this thing?
They recruited you.
Yeah.
You're the buyer, and the seller recruits the buyer. That's a fascinating idea.
So I was the first. I was the first employee here, and let me tell you, so that was 10 years ago, right? No, a bit longer than that. That was 2013, and it was such a jump in terms of getting up to speed with all the technology piece, because one of the difference between digital media and traditional media is that traditional media, you have a newspaper, you have a TV, and you knew what your inventory was. You have 1 day, 24 hours, okay, each minute for an ad is gonna cost you this amount. And you know exactly how much you have to sell. You have a newspaper, you say, well, 1 page is this much money. The interesting thing about digital media is that inventory doesn't exist until you access a website, right? So you, for example, you go and you wanna check the football results, right? You go to your favorite sport newspaper, and that generates an impression. But let's say that your team wins. Suddenly, the impression volumes go because more people jumping in. So the media or the service, they have to calculate how many ads they need to serve. And that's almost impossible to do by hand, right? Because also it has to be done in microseconds. So in the back end of all those websites and all this media, there's this engine that calculates how to serve those ad impressions, right? And is basically the same process that is used was used in stock markets, right?
Oh.
So you will it's a bidding system. So you will have different people bidding for ad space, and the one who's willing to pay the most will get to serve the ad. So the technology that runs behind, you have the advertiser, and you have the audience. But in the middle of this, there are hundreds of companies trying to add to the process, right? So it took me about a year to be able to be comfortable with the data movements and the technology movements that you needed to know in order to talk intelligent to your clients. So that was a very, very challenging but very exciting. We were a small operation. We were only like 5 people at the biggest.
So what was your role? Were you the president of the company?
So I was the business director here in Japan.
The
business director.
Business director. So there was a president.
There was an overseas general manager for APAC, which is who I was reporting. He wasn't based in Japan.
But you were the Japan head.
It was basically a primus inter pares. So there were a few of us, and that was an interesting also decision by this director, right? Because he purposefully decided not to put somebody in charge of Japan.
Really?
So we have 5 people, and we were all directors. So it was very much about how do we. It had good things in the sense like it created a very even feel, but you know how Japan, right? So the rest of the team were Japanese. If there is not a clear hierarchy, there is also not very clear roles and responsibilities.
Yep.
So, when I was asked for my opinion, I say, look, even if it's not me, I do think we should have a country manager in Japan. But that was the way that he decided to do it.
So the people who are running the company were brought in from outside to run it?
So basically we had an APAC headquarters, and we just opened the Japan operation.
And then hired people locally?
And then hired, yeah. So I was the first one, and then we have some additional people coming in.
Because, we talk about, in Japan, career movement decisions are involving the grandparents,
right,
parents, the spouse.
Right.
Everyone's involved. So it's not that easy to get people to make a change. Maybe in the West we're a bit more flexible around changing your career, moving around. I don't think I've ever asked my parents anything about any job I've ever had, or maybe my spouse had a consideration on it. But basically, I've got to do the work, so it's my decision, basically. But so getting people to actually join, that must have been quite challenging, I guess, 'cause you're a very small organization in a very complex area. So was it hard to recruit people?
Extremely hard. And also, it's the same now. You basically need this ideal trifecta of, you need people who know the digital industry, not very many. You also need people who are fluent in English, because our headquarters, like a lot of the work we did was overseas, right?
Right. Oh, sorry.
And 3, you need people with the right mindset. We're small operations.
This smells expensive to me.
Extremely.
I'm
say.
just thinking about, well, okay, how much you have to pay someone in that little trifecta there? It's going to be a lot of dough.
And especially because we were competing with talent, for talent with the likes of Facebook, with Twitter, with Google, and, given the chance, people will go there. Still, we did, there is really good talent out there. I mean, sometimes we have to compromise a little bit. But as you say, we pay well, but people had other career considerations. And I remember when we were, because I was doing the recruiting here, I was hands-on, and I would kind of give my, we need this person, and then my boss will decide, how much money we could afford. But I remember having conversations with people who maybe had been with a company for 10 years, and before they could decide on joining us, a small, maverick outfit out there with a good value proposition, but still very, very shoestring operation. They say, well, I have to speak with my wife, and she has to consult the oracle, and then we will decide. And yeah, it was really, really interesting, because it was a decision.
So your recruiting days skills came to the fore in that recruiting role.
Yeah.
Convincing people to change career, right?
It was very interesting. And again, money was not always the prime motivator, right? As you know, in Japan, stability, risk aversion, things like that become very, very relevant. And just how much confidence the operation installed into people.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. There's also the factor too, I think you're asking people who can deal in English to work for you, right? So
yes.
A lot of those people, in my experience, they want to work in an international environment where they can use their English. They've spent a long, hard road there hoeing away on their English to get their English levels up. They've been studying overseas or whatever they've been doing. And they come back to Japan, and big Japanese corporations, they never get to use it. They feel frustrated. And, it's very hierarchical. It's very formal. They feel very compressed. They want to have that freedom.
Yep.
And so as foreigners, we offer that degree of informality, freedom that they won't get in a Japanese company, capacity to work in a national environment, which is what they want. And maybe the money's not as good, but the freedom is much better. And don't have the politics, you don't have the hierarchy, you don't have the age, don't have the sexism, all that sort of stuff is basically not there. So these tend to be the advantages we play against, the sort of risk-averse nature of things. So how long were you there?
I was there for 5 years. That seems to be my
5
theme.
years. I hope Jellyfish has got the stopwatch out. Click on this. So then you go to Jellyfish from there?
No, and then I was working for Oracle.
Oracle. Wow, you really joined a big company.
Yeah, and that was a big change because obviously, as you said before, this was a small operation. We were technologically very advanced, so the solution we had was at the edge of what digital technology was at the time. But then you know how it is. Startup. They the first year I was doing everything from the business and marketing plan to the photocopies. You know,
Don't worry, I know.
I
I know all about that stuff. Yeah.
I remember having to go and decide which chairs we will buy for the office, right? Because we were opening, we were in a share office. So at one point, I kind of felt that my the mission was completed, right? There was still a lot to grow, but I kind of felt that, look, I've done 5 years. I think, you know, the team and the business is stable enough. It may be time for me. What is the cost of opportunities? Which things I'm not doing that I could be doing, right? And sure enough, yeah, I think I went to the other end of the spectrum, like the biggest company that I could
Oracle
find.
in Japan at that time would have been huge. How many people?
So I think we have, at that time in Japan, we have about like over 3,000.
Wow.
And globally like 140,000.
I know. So did you get to meet Larry?
No, I was not at that level, but I did meet the Japanese CEOs.
You should have said, "I want to tour your Japanese garden," because he's a big Japan fan, right? He's full of antiques in his house and a Japanese
He's
garden.
a big fan.
He's got the whole thing there. I mean, he's a rich guy; he can have what he likes, right?
Yeah.
But still, he's a fan.
So in the Aoyama headquarters, which is where I was working, beautiful building. The top floor is a chasitsu, it's a Japanese tea house.
Really?
With the running water. So it's indoors.
Indoors, right?
But you have the pavilion, and you have a little garden, and you have a lady there who, you know, you make a booking, you take your clients, and they will do a tea ceremony for you live. So
very nice.
That's that's a company with money can afford things like that.
So did you have a leadership role at Oracle?
Yeah. So actually, when I joined Oracle, I was the country manager for Oracle Advertising.
Country manager for Oracle. Yeah. Now here's an interesting question. You've been in some very formal Japanese companies, you know, Sega, Bandai, etc. Informal in some of the smaller companies. Yep. Now you're back to a Western company in Japan with 3,000 staff, 140,000 worldwide. I'm guessing that Oracle was quite a Japanese company in Japan, not a Western style organization. Would that be right?
Very much so, yeah, you're right. And
so you might think, well, I'm joining this Western company, but in fact, all the people are Japanese. The culture's all Japanese, the language is Japanese, everything's Japanese. So it's like working in a Japanese company. To
a degree, you're right, yeah. The interesting thing is my division. So Oracle is known for their IT business, right? Big projects with multi-million companies, and they install the databases. What we were doing as Oracle Advertising is we had we were basically a startup embedded within a larger corporation.
The company, okay.
So we're a division, but we were a conglomerate of independent Silicon Valley companies that they had purchased and put together. And the reason they did that is because they had a first-party data business. And they realized when they acquired that technology to run that business that it came with what is called third-party data, which is buying and selling data for advertising purposes. And that was a $600 million business. That it's just kind of a side product of the technology they bought. So they
not bad,
right?
Not bad. That was accidental $600,000 a year. Oh, look at that, nice.
And to this day, I'm convinced they didn't realize when they bought it. But what do I know? But sure enough, then they thought like, well, this needs to have a home within the company. But the profile of the people working in my division and the rest, it was basically 80 versus what we call a tech advertising technology. And it's very different. It's technology, but it's technology from a very different perspective. So we were lucky, my team and myself, because we live in, so I didn't report to Oracle Japan, I report to international. So we were what it was called. Okay. And so my boss sit first in the US and then in the UK. Right. So we were within
You're like a little satellite operation in Japan, right?
But we sat in the middle of the room. So we were in this open floor, which probably like 100 people. And there were about 10 of us. And the rhythm and the vibe was very, very different. But we needed to work with some of the other divisions, right? So there was a bit of dissonance in there, or a dichotomy of sorts, right? Where we had a certain pace coming from overseas and also in terms of technology. But then the clients were very domestic, and the people that we needed to implement some of those projects, people who were the representative for NEC, for Mitsubishi, they were our colleagues that also move at a different speed. So reconciling those two pieces.
Now, when you say different speed, I'm presuming slow, on their part and fast on your part.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to be honest, just to be fair, we might have been too fast in occasions, right?
Really? Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, as you know, you have to do what your client needs, right?
Yeah.
And if the client moves a certain speed, then it's on you to match that and to move them along, but not to leave them behind, because what's the point of that, right? So that's when my experiences working for Japanese corporations came in very handy, because I realized that we had to set a certain pace and set the urgency, what I mentioned before, but at the same time, we have to be supportive of what the client needed at that particular time. And if we were talking to, like Morimoto-san from marketing, we needed to understand that even if he wanted to do it in our client company, he needed the buy-in of, and I knew how that works, right? So we needed to provide him with support for him to get the buy-in of the board to implement the process.
So how many people in that division that you're running?
So I think maximum we're about 12.
12, right?
But I tell you one thing, our revenue per head was really, really big. Almost double of what we
Just
had
off
around.
the chart.
Yeah, and sure enough, like the technology, because it's a very scalable business, right? So we were sales and marketing, but obviously the technology was a big investment. It was in the back, but the projects were so big and dynamic, right, that we could rack in more revenue than
So Alfonso is getting massive big bonuses and commissions and
I don't know
payouts as a
that,
result
but,
of that. Is there a natural flow there that high per capita production reward is also high? And so how many years at Oracle?
Guess.
5?
Yes. And I this is not planned. This is just the way things move.
So now Jellyfish is how many years?
It's just 1 year now.
Oh, you got 4 to go. Don't worry, no problem.
Just joined last year, yeah.
So thinking about, you leave Oracle, you go to Jellyfish. Now, you come in as the managing director of Jellyfish. You come into the top. Actually, or you come into something else and become the managing director? Yeah,
so originally I was in charge of the VP of revenue for APAC. So my plan when I joined is, because I've been doing the marketing, the country manager for 5 years. I thought look, wouldn't it be nice to kind of expand and do other things? And I kind of came in, I was covering Australia, Korea, Singapore. I was also North Asia director.
When you say the VP of revenue, is that like a sort of sales director type of role?
Yes, yeah, correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
But supervising all the different markets in APAC. But then the country manager, who is a gentleman that I knew well in Japan, he suddenly left after I was there for 6 months. And, they asked me to step in. Yeah.
All right. So again, you're not parachuting in from outside, you're actually coming from inside. Yeah. So thinking about, all these different experiences you've had, and you've had some experiences there. I love that, Alfonso. In terms of getting teams engaged, what things have you found works well?
I tell you one thing that worked very well for me, and this is sometimes when we are talking about training, right? I've been to a lot of compulsory trainings. Some of them are not great, but some of them are really good. And there was this particular training that I had years ago and kind of stayed with me. And it was about the 4 personality types, right?
Amiable, expressive, driver, analytical.
Correct, yes.
Now, I'm imagining you're probably a driver, maybe, or expressive, one of those two.
So actually, I'm primarily an analyst.
Is that right?
Yeah,
You've got too much personality to be analytical type.
No,
Alfonso,
I guess I kind of learned because I was, obviously you're a promoter, like that very, strong.
Yeah, in the marketing department, maybe the accounting department for the analytical.
But it's something I learned in that you kind of develop your secondary. So I think I'm formal reactive to a degree, but over years I've learned to be a bit more proactive because I kind of needed to. But that learning of understanding the 2 axes and how these 4 different personalities, it helped me a lot, and it kind of relates to your business, right? Like teaching people tools that then they can use in the day in, day out.
And just for the audience, the way we describe this is, if you had the time, you put people through a Myers-Briggs 16 quadrant, you can have a look at 16 boxes on that, or a disc, you can get it with a. You don't have that luxury when you meet people. You meet them, you've got to make a judgment on this person. And so we talk about 2 decisions. On a horizontal plane, is this person high in assertion terms or low in assertion terms? That's one decision. On a vertical plane, are they rather people-oriented or are they rather number, KPI, revenue, outcome oriented? And that gives you a rough cut when you meet someone. So they're rather outgoing, assertive. Okay, they're going to be either expressive or driver, or they're not so much, rather quieter. They're going to be amiable, analytical. Then are they sort of, outcome driven, or are they sort of people driven? You can get a rough fix on where they are.
Yeah.
So just so people understand how to have a quick and dirty snapshot to try and work out where people sit. So I didn't do a very good job. I thought you were probably more on the driver because you're on the assertive side, but you actually sound analytical. So obviously my analysis wasn't very good.
Kind of faking it, but you're right, and I can see why you are good at your trainings. But it really, as you say, it really helps you. So when I engage with the team, I always try to put myself, what is the best communication venue to engage with this person, right? So
one by one.
And as you say, it's not that difficult to figure it out. It's like, this person is probably lying in this quadrant. It might have secondary in other quadrants, right? So for example, in our company now, we have people that go all the way from data analysts, which, as you can imagine, they are very
highly analytical people, for sure,
to the salespeople,
who are expressive types.
They kind of tell a story, song and dance.
Yeah.
So in terms of engagement, I have found that that's very, very useful. And it kind of helps me as well to develop some sort of empathetic engagement with them and say, how can I talk to this person in a language that he's more comfortable or familiar with?
And this is the key. It's not that you've become schizophrenic in your personality and you've got 4 different personalities trying to live in the same body. You're Alfonso, but you change your communication style. If it's an analytical person, you're probably going to be more detailed. The opposite of that is expressive. Don't bury me in the weeds, big picture. Don't kill me with data.
Right.
You change your style. If they're a driver, get to the point. If they're an amiable, let's have a cup of tea. So, that ability to communicate, you already speak a number of European languages and Japanese as well, but you also have these 4 languages. The one you're perfect in is your own, but then you learn the other 3 as well. And so it's not that you're fooling people or being fake with people. You're just adjusting to how they feel the most comfortable by choosing the language style that suits them best. And that's why they feel, I'm on the same wavelength as Alfonso. Alfonso understands me, I get where we're going with this. That's a critical skill that most people don't have.
It's I also think that it's not difficult to develop, right? You kind of have to understand, but at the end of the day, leadership is about empowering people, right? And if, as you say, if you are talking to somebody who's a data analyst, is very thought about data, and if you are dismissing the data approach he's taking, that's you're kind of stepping over that person mindset, right?
Yeah.
So and vice versa, if you're talking to somebody who's very dynamic, he's bringing business, but he cannot be tangled down with the details, and you start trying to tell him, no, tell me specifically about this data point, you are pulling him down, right? So trying to empower people.
That would be me.
which is, you need both, right?
Yeah,
you need
people,
both types.
I'm more that sort of bigger picture.
Of course, yeah.
I'm a driver, but I'm, don't kill me with the data. Get to the point. Where are we going with this? What's the strategy? Yeah. What's the outcome we're going to get to? Right? So yes, that's key. And what are the things you found works well in terms of getting people engaged?
The other one that I would say, it's about ownership.
Ownership. Okay.
I think this is huge. There is one.
And is that particularly huge because we're in Japan? Or that just?
I think it applies across the
everywhere?
board, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in Japan has bigger relevance because usually responsibility tends to be a bit more diffuse. It's a group responsibility rather than personal responsibility. Yeah. I think what ownership does, and there is an American author, an ex-Navy SEAL called Yoko Wilkins, that has this concept of string ownership, which is really interesting because his point is like, you can have ownership at any level. You don't need to be the president. You don't need to do this. You control what you want to control, right? And so ownership comes with different caveats. For example, one of the things he says is discipline equals freedom, right? If you have the discipline to get up early every morning, you get the freedom to use more time. He says things like, there's no bad teams, but bad leaders. And it's true, like as a leader, you do have a responsibility. But the end of the idea is, how do you empower people by making them responsible of an area of influence and saying, well, I cannot do this because I'm waiting for something. It's like, no, don't wait for that. You have more capability that you might imagine. You might not be able to deliver the whole revenue of the company, but maybe you can influence client A by being proactive and engaging them and getting one additional project. So things like that. And the interesting thing about ownership is the more ownership you assign or you encourage young people, the more people generate on their own, right? So extreme ownership generates extreme ownership. And I do feel like we are all, human beings, we do have this innate need to build and create things, right? That's why, so many of these hobbies are just building things. And I think at any level of the organization, if somebody tells you, no, this is yours, handle it, make it grow. And then when somebody starts growing that thing, the sense of fulfillment, and again, it might not be your company, but that segment, that plot of responsibility is yours. And if you see it growing and flourishing, it gives you that sense of achievement. And I think that's quite important when engaging with people.
And what about getting ideas from people? Because, when you're the boss, you're plugged into the organization at a very high level. You get lots of information flowing down to you. You're obviously international. You're getting information outside of Japan as well. And your brain's on fire with ideas, right? So then suddenly you realize, well, the idea generation here is coming out of me and not out of these people, What am I doing wrong here? I'm not getting them involved. So what have you found works well to get people to come up with ideas?
That's always engaging. That's always challenging, I think, because as you say, sometimes you get so caught up on how you process the information that sometimes you are maybe not paying attention or you are not encouraging other flows of information. I can tell you, I don't think I have the magic formula. I can tell you, for example, in our team, we do have the team-wide communication channels, and then we have more of a leadership, like within Japan, more of a leadership. And you try to get, because everybody has something to offer, right? It doesn't matter, maybe some junior person who just came out of university all the way to your most reliable right-hand salesperson. So trying to modulate the story to try to get the best response from people, that probably works well. So in my case, we have several directors. So in speaking with them, it's more strategic conversations. And again, not trying to think that you know everything, right? Like these guys are specialists. They know much more than me about the respective areas. But if you modulate the question or the topics around that more senior mindset, then you will get some responses. And then with the rest of the team, which are maybe more like hands-on, very on the weeds, then you modulate the story, what you need to discuss to a different level, something that is a bit more practical, right?
I remember a great story I read I forget where I read it now. It was a country club in America where the wealthy members were stealing the shampoo from the showers.
Okay.
And the board of directors of the country club were having this meeting. They could not work out, they were coming up with all these crazy ideas on how they're going to fix this problem. And someone had the bright idea of asking one of the cleaners, and he said, no problem, I got it. They couldn't believe it. Like, you're only the cleaner, how could you know? He said, I'll just take the cap off the bottles. Can't take it home.
Right.
Because he was at the coalface,
Right.
And
yes.
these guys are extremely well paid, company presidents who are the board of directors of this exclusive country club couldn't work it out. The guy who was the cleaner worked it out in 2 seconds.
Had the solution.
He had a solution because very practical. So, they at least had the brains to ask him, or somehow he got asked and he had the idea. What about trust? You talked a little bit before about trust, building trust. And you've been, you've moved across organizations, you've seen how they build trust, you've had to build trust yourself, going up as a peer to a boss and then moving to different companies and becoming the boss. What have you found works well in building trust in Japan?
Definitely for me, it's when you handle out responsibility, people step up to the level. That's my impression, particularly in industries, like we work in a very competitive industry. If you are in there and you are doing that job, you are a small person. You are doing well. your motivation, your mindset, then it has to be up to the same level. But I think when you trust people with a set of responsibilities, most likely than not, they step up to the level. I had a really good example in my previous company. We hired this manager, right? And he came in, smart guy, international background, well read about all the technical things that we needed. It's just his leadership was not quite. He was hired as a manager, right? So I always felt, and I remember talking to my boss, and I said, like, I don't know, something is missing, right? And it was always that kind of line. He did very well for an individual contributor, but that's not what we hired him for, right? And so at one point we had an option. It's like, well, we either put him somewhere else, or we actually we actually give him a team and see how he responds to that, which is risky, right? Because it might affect the rest of the team. As I mentioned before, it's like no bad team, bad leaders. And we decided to go for the second option. So we set a few account managers working with him. And in 3 months, the difference was like he was much more confident. He was voicing his opinion. One of the issues was his English was not as comfortable as it might have been. So maybe that, but because his team was looking up to this person to drive direction and to say he had to have an opinion on everything, right? Because his team was looking at that. And it worked like magic. It was like really, really
Extremely
good.
bad decision. The correct decision, you should have sent him to me. We put him through some leadership training and we fix him up straight away. Don't have to wait 3 months.
That
Boom,
was
we're
option
done.
B. We'll do that next time.
That was the correct decision, right? So in terms of other areas of trust, anything else you noticed around trust in terms of getting people to follow you as a leader that you found worked well?
I think it's just basic empathy, right? We all work in a corporate environment, and the key parameter is revenue, right? And generating business. That's why we are here. But we should not be forgetting that we are all people, and everybody. So having that degree of empathy, like people are not commodities. When I was working as a recruiter, one of the things that always struck me is that you tended to do that at some degree. You had a position and you were just looking for somebody to fill that position. And maybe, especially in at the junior levels like I was, sometimes all candidates look the same to you. You were just kind of trying to find the right shape to put it. And I think that was the wrong way of looking at it. I think having empathy and understanding that people are more complex than what they might appear on paper, if you get that, people kind of realize like that you are engaging at a different level, and it's not just a purely commercial. It's not only okay, well, you can do this job and this is how much you are generating and that's it, right? There is a larger story in there. Obviously, there has to be accountability, and if you are doing the job, you have to deliver whatever the results there are. But yeah, I have another interesting example. This was also with my previous company where we had this lady, extremely competent, she was just in the wrong position. She was working as an account manager and she didn't have that kind of very specific, very attention to detail. And it was a terrible position for her. But then we moved her into sales and she was excellent, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you kind of have to turn the wheel one way or the other to try to figure it out what works. And I think all of that comes from empathy.
What about culture? Building a culture.
That's an interesting one. You probably know more than me about that because coming from this kind of Silicon Valley, other modern companies, sometimes the talking about culture gets a bit too far, right? We have examples like what happened with WeWork. Well, they were like, oh, we are a family, we are not a company. No, you're a company. It's like, it gets a bit caught up, especially Silicon Valley gets a bit caught up in their own stories.
Really?
But yeah, there is such a thing as culture. And I think culture comes from, are we all aligned to the same principles and parameters? Do we all follow the same rules, so to speak, right? Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been great at theory on that one. I feel that it kind of generates organically when it's. But again, maybe you probably know more than me about that.
Well, we determine the culture here. We don't let it grow organically. We direct it. So, for example, every single day, start of work, we go through our vision, mission, values. We've got a whole raft of things we cover, which is all basically about our why. So every day we try and reinforce and rediscover why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing. So that culture is very common. And we have a gentleman here, we have one of our teams, she's going on maternity leave. So a gentleman's here as a part-timer to cover her job. He's going to be put through one of our courses, key course, because that course really gives us all a common platform of understanding of language, of concepts.
Right.
And we want, even though he's only part-timer, we're going to spend our money to educate him.
Right.
Because that will meld him into our culture. And he, like we take turns on going through this day, we call it Daily Dale every day. And he has his turn too, and he has to lead us through that to try and get a sense of who we are, what's our why here, to try and make it a really strong commonality of purpose. We do that, specifically for that reason. That's how we do it anyway. But if you're going to give some advice to someone who is being sent out to Japan to run an operation here, they ring you up, hey, Alfonso, I've got the big job, I'm coming to Japan, I don't think about Japan. How can I be successful as a leader? What advice would you give them?
I think one that I will say, because as you know, Japan has there are a lot of topics about Japan, and some of them they are right, like I mentioned before, like the social consensus, things like that. One will be, do not underestimate individuality in Japan. I think we tend to think like, oh, it's a group, it's a team, whatever. But individuality, I think it drives a lot of the value on the teams. And again, you have Sato-san who works in your accounting thing, and then you have, Mori-san who works, and all of them have an added value. So one thing we do at my company, something that I installed when I took over, is we have this monthly all hands, right? And we have a lot of these corporate content we have to go through. But we have one spotlight where each month, one member of the team has to come in and tell a story. And it has to be business related, or it has to be a business learning, but it can be as personal or as generic as you want. So it can be about, you do martial arts, what did you learn and how do you apply that to work, right? Or you read this book, what did it tell you? Or you have this particular, and that kind of, one of the objectives there is to see that individuality shining through, because I think there is a lot of value on there. So one of my advices, that what little I have learned on my years here, will be, don't underestimate that, because I think it's powerful. The other one will be, Japan is an archipelago, it's an island nation, right? Island nations are they have their quirks, they are peculiar. You only have to look at the Brits, like people who live in an island, they develop their own very particular sets of idiosyncrasies, right? So take some time to learn that. And again, you don't learn that through business books. Or, for me, one of the, obviously talk to people, but also read the classics. If you want to understand Spain, read Don Quixote. It was written 500 years ago. Still everything is relevant. That's why it's a classic, right? You want to understand China, you read, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. You want to understand Japan, there are quite a few classic books in there that will give you that kind of island mentality, the Yamato nation. And it will kind of give you a bit of context of why people do certain things in work or business or personal life or whatever it is. I guess those
I don't meet too many people who've read the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Or Water Margin is the other one, right?
Right, yeah.
I've read both of those, they're great.
Yeah.
In terms of your definition of leadership, how would you define leadership?
I think I might have mentioned before, for me, leadership comes down to one thing: help others to succeed. If you get your team to do well, you will do well. And if you get your people to, even if they move on and they go somewhere else, if you get them to achieve good results, you have been successful in that, in your leadership journey or process or whatever it is. At least that's how I look at it. And also it gives you a personal satisfaction, right? Like to see somebody you might have been working with moving into bigger and better things. It's good for them, right? And if they are with you, I'm sure they will help you succeed, because you cannot do everything alone.
Quite true. And on that note, let me thank you very much. Thank you,
so much.
Alfonso. I know this conversation could go on much longer, but I know you have an important call to get to tonight.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I'll cut it off here. But please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.